So thank you so much for spending your Saturday morning with us. We want to start this conversation in a good way, and we want to start this gathering in a good way. And part of that means taking some time to center our relationship with the land that we are all gathering on, or I guess almost all of us are gathering on. We are situated on Treaty 7 territory right now. Most of us do our work. We live here. We gather in community here on Treaty 7 territory. And it's important that we think about that, not in terms of just that this is Treaty 7 territory and that was a treaty from the past, but recognizing that that means that there's kind of a history of this land that we need to account for. There's thousands of years of stewardship of this land, of families who have been here, making this a wonderful place to be, taking care of this place, living in this place. And so we need to keep that in mind as we think through what that looks like and what that means for how we exist in this space, with many of us being unwanted settlers on Treaty 7 territory. And when we say Treaty 7, what does that mean? Whose territory is this? This is the traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, including the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani. Also home to Tsuut'ina Nation, Stoney Nakoda Nation, and home to Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. So for those of us who are on Treaty 7 territory, Treaty 7 was and is a promise between nations to share the land and to support one another. And it is up to each and every one of us to make this place and the world better for all future generations. So we want us to make sure that we're thinking about that as we listen in on the conversation that's about to happen, as we move into the breakout rooms and have those conversations about what we're doing with regards to anti-racism and decolonization. We really want you to reflect on what being a treaty person, what having the privilege to be on the lands of what is now known as Calgary, what that means for you as an individual, what that means for you as a community member. So please keep that in your minds and your hearts throughout this conversation today in particular, but also close in mind as you move forward into the world beyond this morning, beyond today. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, hello. I'm Amanda Palmer, and I'm the lead for the Community Development Learning Initiative. And we are a network for community-minded Calgarians who are seeking to make their communities better for all. So we convene people primarily through our monthly meetups, our practitioner gatherings, and occasionally special conversations like this. We help build capacity as well, often through these gatherings and also through a learning curriculum that we offer. I know some of you are either doing it right now or have participated in the past, so good to see you. And we also seek to be a resource hub, a connector of people, resources, information, anything related to community development. We are a very small but mighty team, and we work best by collaborating with others to connect, inspire, and act. I'm going to be your host for the day with some huge tech support from the wonderful Noor, who will be helping monitor the chat for your questions, and helping keep us energized and making sure that the day goes smoothly. So thank you for that support. Why are we here today? For our June meetup, we hosted a follow-up conversation to a Tamarack Institute webinar on creating a culture of equity and reconciliation. And this led to the emergence of an anti-racism and decolonization learning and action team that has hosted a few conversations since that June gathering. And they've also done a lot of work to create some still draft materials like stages of change for becoming an anti-racist community, guidelines for learning, or rather guidelines for unlearning white privilege. And Noor also helped us this summer to create a database for anti-racism and decolonization resources that you can find on our website. And we identified back in June the importance of keeping momentum alive for Black Lives Matter and anti-racism and decolonization efforts that have kind of reemerged or that have been taking place in Calgary, but we're perhaps losing a bit of attention, particularly in the reconciliation and decolonization space with COVID, with funding cuts and that sort of thing. So we wanted to figure out a way to help keep that momentum alive. We were able to put together a team this summer, including Nor, Lionel, and Evert, who is also joining us today again, which is wonderful. Evert was our practicum student this summer. To work on a storytelling initiative where we interviewed Calgarians about their own anti-racism or decolonization journeys. And the goal of that was to capture some key learnings, actions, inspirations that others would benefit from hearing, with the hope of inspiring others to take action or more actions. And we've been sharing some of the wisdom harnessed through these conversations on our blog and social media for the past few months. But we wanted to create an opportunity for community to come together and have a conversation in real time where we could hear from some people on their journeys and also kind of have a conversation to reflect on what that means for us and how we can kind of build some of that collective energy and inspire one another. So today we're going to hear from our roundtable on the power of storytelling for anti-racism efforts. And then after a quick break, we're going to go into breakout rooms to have smaller conversations on how we move forward individually, collectively, to move anti-racism and decolonization efforts forward in our city. Our host for the roundtable is our community development storyteller, Lionel, who has conducted many of the interviews that were done over the summer months. And we are very excited to bring in our roundtable members to have this conversation. And one programming note, unfortunately, Bernadette had something come up and is no longer able to join us this morning. So sadly, we will not be getting the opportunity to hear from Bernadette live today, but we'll definitely we'll get some of Bernadette's thoughts and share them online in the future to make sure that her voice is still heard. And with that, I will turn it over to the wonderful Lionel.
I thank Amanda for this introduction, but yeah, I'm gonna introduce you guys to these three amazing individuals that I had the pleasure of interviewing, and like I know for me personally, they inspired me so much when we were talking. And the first panelist I'm gonna introduce is Nellie Alcaraz. She is a social worker and a community advocate with the international organization My Country is an organization that advocates for rights of temporary foreign workers, undocumented and migrant workers in Canada and around the world. Nearly social work practices mainly with Indigenous people on reserve in Alberta. As a waiter like Filipina nearly came to Canada as a live-in caregiver more than 15 years ago, and she recently has been appointed to the Anti-Racism Action Committee in Calgary. The other panelist is KtheChosen, born and raised in Zimbabwe. KtheChosen is a hip-hop artist studying business at the UFC. It uses its platform to talk about social issues and promote conversations within different communities. Inspired by artists such as James Loss and Campbell Lamar, KtheChosen challenged himself to write lyrics that are both entertaining and enlightening. Although his main focus as a social activist is gender-based violence and consent training. He also attend protests and make music that discusses the Black Lives Matter movement. Another final list, certainly not least, is LeeAnne Ireland. She is a graduate of the English Studies program at one university where she was awarded the Louis Carver Award for her excellence in critical theory. Since 2008, LeeAnne has been an executive director for the Urban Society for Aboriginal Youth, USA, as the executive director for USA annual experience at one university. She understands the issues and barriers that that individuals youth are facing and the best approaches to creating services that can be successful throughout our experiences. She has been able to learn the unique and vibrant resources that serve our engage with youth demographic, LeeAnne personal business and educational choices have inspired her to be connected with our community and aspire her to be of service to engage in its people. And thank you so much for coming here and for talking to us about your anti-racism and decolonization journey in this fine Saturday morning. My first question to you guys as a panelist. So I'll ask your storytelling impact, your influence, your anti-racism, and our decolonization journey. And let's start off with Nellie.
Hi. Yeah, so the first is how has storytelling influenced my anti-racism and decolonization journey?
Yep.
Yeah. So I think it's important that I mention first the context of the society that I think we have right now. We exist in an era of global capitalism that goes hand in hand with white supremacy. They both proliferate through inherent or internalized entitlement to extract, dominate, to intrude, to own, and to take up spaces by all means, including the use of violence, thereby consequently robbing, displacing, suppressing, and excluding those that do not conform with the prevailing social system. So when I embark in storytelling, I also go through a journey of going through the archives of how I was colonized, the unraveling of relationships, the unpacking and reorganizing of my experiences, and the way my history that makes sense to me, and to examine them through the lens that I have, which lens is also not divorced from these structures and social realities that I happen to exist. So, as an immigrant woman of color who came to Canada through the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, which is a vestige of slavery, storytelling provides me the venue to produce alternative knowledge that challenges, threatens, and disrupts the dominant narrative, a narrative that venerates capital and whiteness. Storytelling provides me the power that the colonial paradigm does not allow me to do. It provides me a way of reimagining the Therefore, in this juncture of history, my experience of storytelling from the location that I occupy is a revolutionary feat. I think this would be the same if storytelling is to be done by and from the point of view of any marginalized Blacks, Indigenous, and people of color. Therefore, more than a mere act of reflection, storytelling for me could be a revolutionary act, a subversive act, a site for rebellion towards the existing social order. Storytelling is a journey to a place where people are valued because they are people. And that alone should be enough for everyone to have a place and value in this society.
And then let's get KtheChosen to answer next.
Sorry, was that for me?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Lionel. First of all, thank you for having me. So I find that as an artist, it's there's two ways that I look at storytelling, especially when it comes to anti-racism or any kind of I guess exploration into social issues. So it's kind of like I kind of look at this question from two aspects. The first being that as a fan of music, a lot of times I'm made aware of what's going on in the world through music. You know, if I listen to, let's say, an artist in Nigeria, they might mention what's going on with SARS. I might listen to someone in Latin America and find out what's going on there. And that kind of inspires me to learn more because I'm hearing the personal experiences first. So for me, I feel like storytelling is a good way to open up the conversation and get people interested about something. And I think maybe interested isn't quite the word, but more like aware, you know, because a lot of these things are, there's a lot of violence involved. There's a lot of people experiencing obstacles to, you know, fulfilling and thriving in their own lives. So, you know, it's one thing when someone tells you, oh, these are the statistics. It's another thing when someone tells you their personal story. You can imagine what they've been through. And I think it makes it a bit easier to sympathize, to empathize rather, and to really kind of think of the gravity of their situation, especially if you haven't experienced it yourself. Because I think although things like racism affect a lot of people, there are certain sections that don't experience it as, I guess, intensity. And there's also a couple of people who really don't believe that racism exists. So when you hear enough stories, you realize, all these people can't be making this up. There must be some truth to this racism thing, you know? So for me, storytelling is important because it adds, I guess, a human factor to it. And then again, as an artist, I think it also makes the music I make more accessible. You know, when I tell my story, if anyone is from Zimbabwe themselves, or if someone is Black, or if there's any section of my music that someone can relate to, they're like, oh yeah, I've been through that too. So they don't feel as alone. So I think storytelling is really important in making sure that the information and the topic being discussed is accessible to everyone.
Through accessibility and the human nature side is so important. And about LeeAnne, how does storytelling impacted your journey?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Lionel, for inviting me. I'm LeeAnne Ireland. I'm a mixed race and Anishinaabe person from Treaty 1 territory. I think it's probably important to acknowledge that. I think storytelling, very much so for Indigenous people, is a core way of knowing and being. And it's how you sort of learn the lessons of those that came before you and that will come after you. But I think for everyone, storytelling is almost like a bit of a compass. You know, it as you learn stories or you hear stories, it allows you to know where you're placed in terms of society and what lessons are to be learned and how we're going to learn them. And I think it's kind of almost a building upon of things that people have done correctly and incorrectly throughout history. And there's this opportunity, I think, through storytelling, even more so than literature or music, in my opinion, storytelling can connect people. It opens up that sort of empathy pathway that KtheChosen was talking about, which was this, it's kind of opens up people to hear of other people's journeys and experiences and how they see themselves and how they reflect upon who they are in relation to others. And I think that storytelling uniquely has this ability to connect people and foster sort of a deeper understanding of who we all are. For me, and maybe this is kind of a harkening back to my, oral traditional roots, but I think it does that in a way that other mechanisms really can't do that. And I think also kind of KtheChosen and Nellie really touched on this. Storytelling is such a personal perspective, and it's very subversive, and it's very reflective. And so you get the opportunity to tell your story exactly as you want to tell it. And that can be very radical in some ways. And then by virtue of telling it, people, listening is so receptive. So people really hear what you're saying. And I think that allows them to understand social issues better.
Yeah, definitely. And I love how you really talk about it's personal, but that is one of what connect with each other by sharing personal stories and for telling our own experiences. And my second question is, when you guys share your stories, what are you hoping will come from it? And what do you need or expect from those who are listening? And let's start off with LeeAnne.
Yeah, so I guess when I share my story, I hope that it provides a perspective that's not often given a lot of space or voice, which is that of Indigenous women. We're often not heard in the community. And then I think too, I have a unique perspective of walking sort of in these two worlds, being perceived as white and Indigenous at the same time. And so depending on who you're around, getting treated very differently in Canadian society. And experiencing both systemic racism and racism on a personal level, but then also kind of getting a sneak peek behind the curtain of what non-Indigenous people say when they don't think they're in a room with somebody that's ethnic, I guess, or racialized, or whatever you'd like to call it. So I think when I share my story, I guess I am trying to create a space that exists for Indigenous women that doesn't necessarily exist naturally, and kind of carving out that unique voice and place where we can tell our unique experiences. I guess what I expect from people is to actually listen instead of just waiting for their turn to talk. And I'm really hoping that they listen with, an open heart and have empathy and kindness. And even if our political views do not align, I hope that, they can still have empathy and acknowledge and listen to what I'm saying. I think that's kind of what's kind of missing right now in our current political and social climate, is the ability to listen without wanting to speak next. So I hope that's sort of what people do when they listen to my story. And yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And KtheChosen, what are you hoping and what do you expect from people?
So I really like what LeeAnne closed with, the idea of people listening with open hearts, because for me, I I kind of want people to continue the conversation after I've shared a story. But you can't continue a conversation if you aren't listening. You know, like you said, like she said, if you're jumping to kind of say your part, you're not actually listening to what that person is saying. So you end up talking off topic or just imposing your views as opposed to having a conversation about it. So in a way, like when I do tell a story, it's almost a form of self-release and expression. I take things that have been on my mind or conversations I've had with other people and kind of put them out into the world so that they're not just existing in my head, they exist in the world. And once they exist in the world, it's for other people to then kind of, I guess, insert themselves in it and say, okay, can I relate to this? Can I not relate to this? If I can, why? If I can't, why? And let's kind of discuss that to be like, okay, cool. This is my position in the world and maybe the experiences I've had. And these are the experiences you've had. Now that I've listened to what you said, let me tell you about mine and kind of, we can learn from each other, you know, because different people experience different things, right? So there's so much you can learn by having a conversation, but it all starts from the listening part of it. But yeah, so the next step for me is I need you to listen. And then after that, let's talk about it because conversations with people are so much fun. And I don't know, I feel like there's just so many cool things to hear from other people.
Yeah, definitely. And Nellie, what are you hoping will come from it? And what do you expect only from others who are listening?
Yeah, so when I share my story, I'm hoping that those who could hear me will see and hear the world from my end. So I'm a racialized immigrant woman. I came as a precarious migrant worker. And as I mentioned, as we live in a global capitalism in tandem with white supremacy, people that do not conform with white supremacy and capitalist ideologies are seen as less than people. In some period of the past, they were not even seen as people. So I'm hoping that I would be able to share how we are all connected, and you know, I just we need to humanize our stories, and I'm hoping that's the when I share my story, I'm hoping that's the the essence that I would be able to convey. Yeah, because when people are dehumanized by the system, we could be owned, we could be exploited, and the prevailing dominant system has the right, to conquer our lands, to conquer our bodies. And when I share stories, I'm hoping that I'd be able to relay that that's to counter that ideology. So I hope people could feel the pain of those who had to desperately leave their families, their home countries, because their homelands, their bodies, their minds were exhausted and exploited. The resources of the so-called third world countries, leaving people there without option but to leave, would enter the minds of the listeners. And I hope that people would ask many questions, that despite the so-called development that we claim right now, while there are so many people in the world who are suffering from extreme poverty, while there are few who enjoy tremendous amount of wealth. And I hope that those who could hear my story could also feel the urgency of doing something. Right now, there are so many undocumented migrants in Canada who live in hiding, in fear, without services. And this is Canada. There should be no reason for people to live in hunger, in fear. But why is this happening? So when I tell my story, I'm hoping I'd be able to also, journey with the listeners towards advocacy and advocacy for human rights, advocacy for indigenous rights, advocacy for the basic rights of everyone. And there is really no need with so much, with the wealth that we have in the world, and unfortunately it's concentrated in so many people, in very few people's hands, and unfortunately it's concentrated in the global north, which is including Canada and Europe and other developed countries. Through my story, I'm hoping that we could both embark in answering why is this happening, and why is the government allowing this to happen? And if the government is allowing this to happen, the government that we elected, it's election right now in the US, the government that widely voted by the people to protect us, the people who voted them, why is this happening? We need to question. I'm hoping that storytelling would embark us into more questions, so that we create a society where everyone belongs, where there is maybe not no injustice, but less injustice, and that marginalized people will be able to live in with integrity and dignity, because right now that is not happening. And yeah, I hope that my story would, and when I do my storytelling, it's reflective of that hope, to have a society where we all can coexist together in integrity and dignity, without dehumanizing anyone or seeing anyone as less than human. Thank you.
I totally agree with all of you guys, because it's all about listening, and when you listen, you open your mind, and when you open your mind, you open your heart, and it's all about love, isn't it? And my final question, you guys, when I asked you this question, but and one word, what do you give me one word? What do you think is the most important action that people are listening can take right now? And let's go with KtheChosen.
Thanks, Lionel. So I really liked what Nellie said, where it's important to have these conversations so that people actually question things. And from that, my word is actually accept. Accept that things aren't accept that you aren't perfect, but also accept that there's room for change around us. I think a lot of times we kind of just we want to make change without kind of accepting what's already there. And I think once you accept, I guess who you are, you accept other people and allow them to speak their truth. Once you come from a place of acceptance, you're probably listening with bigger ears. And then you can also accept that sometimes you need to put yourself in a difficult environment to have those conversations. So almost like accepting the uncomfortableness of having talks about anti-racism, having talks about prejudice, because a lot of people tend to deflect as opposed to accept that this is a truth. They're like, oh no, racism isn't happening. It's like, no, accept that this is a truth, not accept it in that saying that you're allowing or approving it, but accept the fact that it exists so that you can discuss it. Because if you're ignoring the fact, any conversation you're having is like, you're not present because you haven't accepted that this is actually happening. You're kind of pretending to accept. So I think acceptance is the first part, and it comes from yourself, the community, and second, the situation. Because once you acknowledge that there's a problem, you can then fix it.
Oh, but you, Nellie, what is your word?
So for me, I think courage. I think before I think even when we look at our experience, we need to have that courage to be in uncomfortable position, courage to be in discomfort, courage to take position, courage to take action, and courage to sacrifice what is needed, even when it's painful for us. And that unfortunately kind of, in this system of owning and robbing and just stalking as much as we can, even though, we won't be able to some people wouldn't be able to spend all their money, and even if they live 60 times, but and that's the ideology, and that's the culture that we have. So the courage to even recognize that we somehow is complicit in the system, and how are we taking action is, it takes courage all the time. Whatever we do, we go back to our past, we reflect, we acknowledge the presence, and we plan for the future, and we take actual action. They all require a courageous act from our end. So yeah, so my word for, that I think people that are listening right now, and it's important to take, is, be courageous.
Oh, but you, LeeAnne, what is one word?
I would say connection, which is probably not as good as courage or acceptance, but for the same reasons, in that, I think a lot of people believe in these ideologies that are separate than, so they believe in their whiteness or their Republicanness or their conservativeness, or all of these things that they believe to be them and separate from everybody else. But the truth is that we all share the same energy, and that we are all connected. And the kinder you are to yourself, the kinder that you'll be to others. If you realize that by hurting yourself, by hurting others, you're hurting this entire system of energy that we share, right? And so when I spoke to Lionel for my interview, he said, what does community mean to you? And I said, it means the nature around me, the animals, the sky, the dirt, the rocks, the inanimate objects, the people that I'm all connected to, because in my belief system, there's no one external to me. That spirituality and energy and goodness are all one. And it's all something that we contain in myself. So, Nellie is my sister, and KtheChosen is my brother in this world that we all live in. And so to treat myself and them with kindness is to kind of honor the spirit that we all have. And so I would say that I think the cure to racism and hate and that disparity is probably just recognizing our innate connection to one another.
Well said, everyone. Like, I couldn't come up with that one word answer myself, but like, I love your answers. And do we have time for Q&A, Amanda?
Yeah, I think we can definitely take a couple questions. And people can either unmute themselves and say their question, or rather ask their question, or you can throw it in the chat.
Yeah.
I have a question. Can I jump in?
Yeah.
Hey, I really love listening to everybody's answers and words and values of storytelling. But one of the things that strikes me in many conversations about racism is that we end up focusing so much on how to improve our individual connections and relationships and hear each other and reach out and love each other or accept or, be brave in talking to each other more. And I'm all for that. But does that deal with systemic racism? How do we make the leap to the organizations and the institutions and these structures where the racism is embedded? I think Lionel might be smiling because I'm teaching a class that he's in and we're trying to answer that question and I don't have the answers to the question. So maybe you have the answers and then by the time the class ends, you know, we'll have some resolution, but I'm just still really struggling with that.
You know, I think if I can just jump in, I think Nellie was, you know, kind of hitting on it a little bit, which is the more individuals become courageous and accepting and figure out connection, the more they'll stop voting for and putting systems in place that create disparity between people. You know, and they'll stop voting for systems and humans that create this disparity, right? I don't think that that's enough. I don't think that it'll create change as fast as we would like, but I think building connections between people is probably the best way to start making the change that we need. And then those small groups of people will hopefully fight those larger systems. And then the rest of us can all start voting a little bit better and demanding systems be a little bit better. But
Can I say something? Can I say something? How do you get in the conversation? Hi guys, I'm Rowena.
Hi, Ro. We're going to be
Yeah.
having breakout room conversations afterwards, but if you
Okay.
want to throw in a question here or some thoughts in the chat.
Oh, it was
and
just a
having-
question. Okay, it's okay.
What's your question?
No, you were asking how do you guys start? Like whatever. How about starting with the truth? Would that help? I think that would be the great start, is starting with the truth.
Awesome.
That's what I wanted to say. Like listening, it boils down to the truth. Once you start telling the truth, then everything will fall in place.
Absolutely.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Ro.
Okay.
Can I jump in on the question of systemic racism?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so as systemic racism, if, you know, even if it's defined, it's complicated. So it will take a lot of actions and efforts and planning and, you know, the entire community. This is a system. Slavery was in place for how many 100 years, right? And it didn't stop by Barack, right? You know, it was, and slavery until now is still existing, even though we say that we are in a capitalist society. There are still vestiges and remnants of slavery is still occurring in this capitalist society because it benefits the few. And I think that's the same with racism. We need to not think of it as just a phenomenon that's divorced from the economic system. It is all together. They are all accompanying with capitalism and racism. Before it was racism and slavery, racism and feudalism. So it's all the class society, and you know, it's if we are changing the entire system, it will take a while. It will take tons of effort from everyone, and you know, lots of courage, lots of sacrifices, and lots of pain, and lots of discomforts. So I think we need to, and this is good. Speaking our truth is good. But we might have different version of truth, unfortunately, depending on the power that we occupy, depending on the circumstances that we all were exposed to, depending on the society that, you know, depending on the power and the relationships that we have and we had in the past. We all occupy different powers and oppression, right, and privileges. So yeah, it's gonna take a while, but I think this is a good conversation to have, and this is part of the long journey, and we are all part of this journey. So yeah, I wish I also have short answer, but you know, we will answer this together, and it's a complicated answer as well as complicated journey that we all have to take, unfortunately.
I think Jeny has a question.
Hi, Lionel. Thank you, Lionel. Just really quickly, Robbin. So I teach social justice and social policy at the university as well. And this is an important question. And I think when you think about anything in terms of systems, so systemic oppression, we have to think about the system and all the different components of a system. So individual acts and how we interact with each other is part of a system. The policies that we have in place in our institutions and our governments is only one part of a system. We think about our practices. We think about the relationships we have between groups of people, between institutions and our people. We also think about the power dynamics between groups of people, institutions, and groups of people. We also think about the mindset, like, societal mindsets. In order to affect change, I always talk to my students about what is a system first. Understand that, of course, systems are very complex, but sometimes we have to break it down for people to understand, because it's just not good enough of an answer to say it's complex and that's it. I love using the FSG model of systems change to help explain what's explicit and what's implicit in systems. And then as we do our work, how do we target? They talk about 6 conditions of change. Exactly. Alyssa, thank you very much. And so it's about how I've approached it is saying that there are the 6 conditions of change. We need to be attacking all 6 in order to make change. One initiative is not going to attack all 6. It's not possible. So it's understanding that multiple initiatives, depending on who wants to work on them, are hitting those 6, like I use, because it's a triangle, an upside down triangle model. Anyway, that's how I talk to my students about, like we talk about racism. We talk about other forms of systemic racism. And I explain that I teach policy, and I'm like, just know that policy is only one piece of a system, of systems change. I'm teaching you this, but here's the larger one, like the larger, like how a system looks. Anyway, that's me babbling on, but I just wanted to say that sometimes talking about systemic oppression, systemic racism, you need to start looking at what are the conditions that are holding racism in place. You think about those 6 conditions, talk about that. And then what can we do at those 6 conditions to make a change? Anyway, that's my thoughts.
Thanks, Jeny.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much to our incredible roundtable for this great conversation. I think let's stop here for now and take a 5-minute break. And when we come back from our 5-minute break, we will move into some breakout rooms to continue these conversations and have the opportunity to dig into what's coming out for us and to share that. We'll give some more instructions for breakout rooms when we come back, but let's take a 5-minute break to stretch, to refresh our refreshments, and get ready for some really, really important conversations. And a huge, huge thank you to KtheChosen and LeeAnne Ireland and Nellie Alcaraz and Lionel for hosting. That was really wonderful.
Okay.